This week we're going to talk about stems and roots. And principally we're going to focus in on what is known as woody stems, and we're going to start by talking about the external structure. When we look at the external structure of a stem, we begin by examining a dormant twig. And this is a diagram of such a twig, and this is a focus in on the head of such a twig. And the one part that is accentuated here is the part known as the bud. And the bud is the part of the stem that allows for the growth of new stems. The end of the stem is known as the apical or terminal aspect of the stem. And then there are also lateral aspects or lateral buds. So you have apical bud, which is the terminal part, and then the lateral bud, which is on the sides of the stem. And over the bud are the bud scales, which are shown here. And then you also see what's known as bud scale scars. These are rings that circle the stem and indicate growth. Here's an example of a bud scale scar here, and another example here. Areas where leaves are growing or have grown are known as nodes, with the section between nodes known as the internode. This is the section of a stem between each node. Sites where previous leaves were attached but have now fallen off are called leaf scars. And then the passage points where the vascular tissue goes from the leaf scar into the leaf or into the petiole is known as a bundle scar. And lastly, there are openings in the stem that allow for air to enter in and out of the stem that are known as lenticels. So let's take a look at a diagram so we can see where each of these parts that I've mentioned, where they are. And first you see the bud scale, which is right here. Inside the bud scales is the embryonic leaves. At the end of the shoot, or at the end of the apex, the stem is called the shoot apex, and the terminal bud is on the top of that. This is an example of two lateral buds. Here's a more grown part of a lateral, which was originally a lateral bud. The distance between two nodes, this is a node, and the distance between these two is called an internode. And so this obviously is the node. And then here we have the bundle scar. Portions of the stem here that allow for the air to enter are called the lenticle. And then this bigger section is called a leaf scar. So these little white dots here are the bundle scars. And then the bigger part is the leaf scar. And then lastly, the bundle scale scar is here on this stem. So how do the leaves grow, or the stems grow in length? The primary growth is that when the stem grows in length from the tips of their branches. There are different kinds of branching that can occur. One is called spiral-like, which is when the principal growth is primary growth, that is straight up and down like this tree here. And then there's a spreading growth where the lateral branching is more significant than the vertical branching, and this is an example of spreading branching. Now let's take a look at the internal structure of the woody stem. The outermost part of a woody stem is called the bark, and it contains the phloem, the cortex, and the epidermis. Inside the bark is the wood, which provides strength and support, and then in the center of the stem is the pith, which is the center part of the stem. And in these areas, there's the tiny tubules that carry the water. So the bark extends from this inner ring here to the external aspect, with this inner ring representing the vascular cambium. And then inside that is the xylem, which becomes the wood when it becomes old and decrepit. And then centrally you have the pith. Now the bark consists of a single cell thick layer known as the epidermis. And the epidermis has two functions. First of all, it prevents the stem from drying out. And secondly, it acts against the attack of parasites. In the middle of the stem, or the bark, is the cork, which is a stronger protective tissue that is actually formed from the epidermis. And then the central part of the bark is the cortex, which stores food for the stem. And then, as I talked about previously, the lenticles, or lenticels, allow for oxygen to enter the stem. And so you start with the single layer epidermis, which prevents drying out and parasites. Then in between, you'll have cork, which is not really shown here. Then the cortex, which is the site where food is stored. And then the vascular aspects, which is the phloem, and the vascular cambium, which works to form the phloem. Now the phloem is made up of a series of tubes, and the end of each tube is something known as a sieve plate. The sieve plate is a perforated plate at the end of the phloem cells that allow for the fluid to flow through. And here on this diagram right here is a sieve plate. This is the phloem tube. Actually, this whole area, inner to outer, is the phloem, this whole area here, formed by the vascular cambrium. And you have the better, younger phloem on this side, and the older looking phloem on this side. And here are the sieve plates. Here's one here, here's one here. And connecting the phloem cells are the sieve tubes, which allow for the fluid to flow up and down the stem. And then the reinforcing area, which is right in here, these areas right here are called companion cells, right in this area. So the vascular cambium is this inner part in this area right here. The vascular cambium is what eventually forms the phloem cells. So again, if we look at the bark, we start in this area with the phloem, and the phloem is made up of sieve tubes and sieve plates, and then in between phloem cells are companion cells that support. Now these vascular rays are vascular tissue that go from inner to outer instead of from top to bottom. And then you see that the central part of the bark is the vascular cambium, which forms the phloem, and then the inner part of the bark is the xylem. Remember, the phloem carries sugar and nutrients down from the leaves, where the xylem carries water and minerals up from the roots. Now the wood is a strong intersection of the woody stem that is reinforced with a substance known as lignin, and lignin joins with cellulose to make a very strong substance. And within the wood is the xylem cells in broadleaf trees, and the xylem cells carry, as I said, water and minerals up from the roots into the rest of the plant. And in conifers, instead of xylem tubes, they have what are known as tracheids, and tracheids conduct water much like the xylem does. Now the difference between conifers and broadleaf trees is that broadleaf trees make up dense wood or hardwood, and this is because they have extra fibers in their wood, whereas conifers principally have soft wood that lack these extra fibers. When we talk about vascular tissue, we are talking about the xylem and the phloem together. And as I said before, vascular rays radiate out from the center to carry water, food, and waste products in and out in a diameter type way, as opposed to up and down the length of the tree or other plant. And then in softwood plants, conifers, there are special ducts in the cells special cells that produce resin and allow for the spread of resin throughout the wood. Moving in from the bark, talking about pith, hardwood, and sapwood. The pith is the center of the woody stem. The cells are packed loosely and function as water storage. The heartwood is the older aspect of the inner wood that primarily is made up of clogged xylem cells. This word should not be confused with the word hardwood. This is heartwood. And then the sapwood is the younger functioning xylem that is farther from the center of the tree or other plant. How are annual rings formed? This occurs with secondary growth. The secondary growth is the growth in the diameter of the stem with the increasing thickness and increasing diameter. The annual rings are formed because of periods of faster and slower growth, which produce distinct layers of xylem. The faster growth is generally in the spring, the slower growth in the summer and fall, dormancy during the winter, and so the faster growth is generally a lighter color, the slower growth is a darker color, and results in rings, and you can count the rings and tell how old the tree or other plant is. The grain is the combination of spring growth, which is faster, as I said before, and summer growth, which is slower.